A very good evening. Welcome to Legally Speaking. I'm Nancy Nelime, and now a once very lucrative and colorful career, which is the media, has now been recently riddled with attacks from state officials, begging the question, is the media really free in the country? And of course, right here with me on a different set are my panelists here in studio. Right next to me is Eric Odor, Secretary General, Kenya Union of Journalists. Welcome and good evening.
Good evening, how are you?
Fine, thank you.
Once again.
Good to see you too. And on the other end is Obunde Stephen, an advocate. Welcome.
Good evening.
Good evening. So let's dive straight into a conversation. Odor, you have been in this game, in the media industry, for many years, served in different capacities. Maybe just briefly tell us how far we've come.
Yeah, if you look at in Africa largely, Kenya has got better laws for the media, and the media is a little bit free and independent in Kenya compared with other countries in Africa, even in terms of investments and even the capacity of journalists compared with journalists working in other countries. You see the minimum nowadays in any newsroom, you will get master degree. And so that tells you that there have been huge investment in human resource and also in technology and also in the businesses that run the media. But of course, we usually have this pull and push between the government and the media. And for right now, we are seeing a regime change. And every regime, whenever they come into power, they usually have their own way of trying to regulate the media. So that's what we are seeing right now, Kenya Kwanza. But now the Kenya Kwanza is an unprecedented one because of the energy and the sustained attacks that we've seen from the government, both verbal and sometimes even physical confrontation between security officers and journalists. So if you compare that, because at least I was there during Moi, towards the end of Moi's regime, then Kibaki came in. Kibaki, of course, also, we had some people in the government of Kibaki who were not pleased with how the media was doing its work, as much as media was free at that point. I remember there was even a raid of a Standard Group by some mercenaries and officers. And even at some point also, we saw the former First Lady, Lucy Kibaki, also raiding, going to a media house at night, that nation media, to complain about the coverage of some stories. Then come in Uhuru Kenyatta, who said that we read newspapers, then at the following day we use them to wrap meat.
Right.
Exactly. So we've seen this kind of attacks from different regimes, only that now this one is sort of a different scale. But of course, you know that they abhor the media. If you look at how they were campaigning last year, they said that the media was in bed with Azimio, that was also competing for state power with Kenya Kwanza. And now, come 10 months in office, the media has been vocal. The media has been churning out a number of stories, detailing some of the things that are happening in the government. So that is what we are seeing. But of course, as the media, we've never sought to be friends with the government, because the relationship between us is to hold those with the power to account. So we are not looking for friendship with the government.
So that is the role of the media.
That is our role. Our role is to annoy the government. Our role is to tell the public, and we usually say that our commitments and loyalty is with the people of Kenya, not with the government. The government has got role. It has got its social contract with the people, and the election pledges, especially now that we're just 10 months after election. So is the government to deliver to the people. For us is to hold them to account and to ask those difficult questions, because that is journalism. Journalism is saying what people would not ordinarily want said. So basically that is what we are seeing between the relationship between the media and the government. The relationship world over has always been adversarial. Even look at in the US, the former president Donald Trump, he came up with the word fake news because he didn't like the way the American journalists were holding to account. So the relationship between the government and the media has always been adversarial. However, we usually say that as much as that relationship is supposed to be that way, but they should not resort to physical attacks on journalists, and also coming up with the campaigns and propaganda against the media, because all of us will need a better society. And we can't have a better society if we have got a media that is not free, a media that is weak, a media that is intimidated, media that is blackmailed left, right, and center.
Right.
Yeah.
And bringing our legal mind into this conversation, Stephen, the very fast time after now the Kenya Kwanza regime got into power in March, the Azimio protest, where journalists got brutally injured by police. So just paint for us the picture. We know there is the freedom of the media, freedom of expression enshrined in the Constitution. And so then, when the journalists complain of being hurt, so where was action not taken?
I think we're in a situation where we are currently looking at an interplay between freedom of expression and freedom of the press itself. And our Constitution, our drafters were very wise to think of it in two ways: to not only protect the freedom of expression, but also to protect the freedom of the press in its own particular article. And when you look at Article 34 of the Constitution, it speaks very clearly on what government role, what government's role in at least facilitating the press is. And it is also very clear on the limitations of what government can do, and it is also very clear on what government should not do. An example is government should not exert or even attempt to exert any control or interfere with how media or how the press conducts its business. And actually, it is reprimandable when the state attempts to exert control. So we are seeing different kinds of control in this particular case. Number one, we are seeing some sort of economic or financial control with the line that the CS industrialization is going with. And we're also seeing, during the Azimio protest, now we see some sort of police power or police brutality that is now being exerted not just on ordinary civilians, but also on the press who are reporting on the problems that the civilians are facing.
Right.
So it's a question of when will we start to fully enforce our Constitution? Because we seem to enforce it in certain areas, but certain areas we also just seem to lie down. So it's a question of how long will we take before we finally accept that the whole of the Constitution needs to be implemented, not just at certain areas which maybe favor certain people at certain times. So Article 33, freedom of speech for each and every person.
Right.
Article 34, freedom of the press. Article 27, no discrimination, no discriminating on certain parties because of maybe you perceive that they are doing things in a way that you don't like. Or even going further to something like Article 75, where we are saying leadership, persons in positions of authority should behave in a certain way, and if they do not, then their conduct is really unbecoming of a leader, and there are circumstances which they're supposed to be removed. So it's a question of when will we finally take charge and implement of the whole of the Constitution.
Right.
Yes.
And I believe we have a clip, Mr. Director, if we can play that, of the recent attacks on the media. Do we have that? Right, before we get that going, then we have bodies that are protecting media, the journalists in the country. The Media Council, for example, the Media Council, also I understand we have the video, so we can play that before we get back into the conversation.
No condition is permanent. No, for a long time, our friends in the media were used to criticizing us and nobody used to question them. Now things have changed because no situation is permanent. Along the way, they have criticized the political class for so many years. And we took the criticism in stride. And we agreed that they hold us to account. They criticize us. But things have changed also. Now we are also saying somebody needs to hold the media to account for the things that they write. So welcome to the world of Moses Kiarie Kuria. Welcome. Because no situation is permanent. And I'm so happy the way the media has reacted to criticism. It's good you are feeling the way we feel. You have been hitting us left, right, and center. Nobody has ever held you to account. Now, Moses Kuria ameuliza nyinyi maswali tatu tu. You are all over, you are crying. You have seen nothing. We want to ask leaders in this country to join Moses Kuria to hold the press to account. They must be accountable for what they write and what they say. And if they write lies, they must be countered with facts. There is nobody who is immune to accountability. Everybody must be accountable for your actions. And the same way, the courts have been persuaded to gag Moses Kuria from holding the press to account. I want the same courts, when leaders go to court and ask them to restrain the media from criticizing leaders, the same courts must give same orders so that we are fair. We must have equity and fairness. What is good for Nation newspaper must be good for Moses Kuria. This is a new world. So watu ya media karibuni kwa hii Kenya mpya, tutazoeana pole pole. Mnatugonga hapa kidogo, tunagonga nyinyi saa 8. Sasa nyinyi Kuria amegonga nyinyi kidogo, sasa na nyinyi mtugonge kesho, na sisi tugonge nyinyi kesho kutwa, siku zinaenda. And we get to learn to stay with each other. But you must now be accustomed to that new way of doing things. You have been having a few days for too long. You must take responsibility for what you write. You must be accountable for what you say.
Right, and those are just the recent attacks on the media by different people. Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua, they're taking center stage. So what do you make of the clip that we have just seen, that on repeated occasions the Deputy President has undermined, castigated the media? Yes. In the 21st century, in 2023.
You see, I've always said that any day I'll hear government and those in government, especially like Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua or any officer in the government praising the media, I think there'll be something wrong. The government, but anytime you see government officers, leaders complain about the media, it means that the media is doing its job.
So this is not unusual.
Exactly, yes. So that's what I said from the beginning, that we're not in the business of making friendship with the government, because our work is to hold the government and those who are holding leadership positions to account. And nobody likes accountability. Because if you look at some of the stories that have come out in the media, of course, the government, people in the government, not like, if you're talking about 6 billion in the importation of edible oils, of course, they are beneficiaries. And the beneficiaries will not like that. We're talking about KEMSA, the scam in KEMSA, people losing money, of course, because they returned the money to the global fund. But that means that somebody missed out, talking about circulation and sale of condemned sugar. People expected to benefit from that, talking about NHIF being unable to pay bills in hospitals because money that was supposed to use has been taken away by individuals. So people will not be happy if you're holding them to account. So whenever you see, and that's what as we've said, and of course you must realize that we responded once and we kept quiet. We've not responded because we made our position that you can make noise, but our commitments and loyalty is with the people of Kenya. We'll continue serving the people of Kenya. Then also we will continue to look at the stories and the happenings in the government, whether they are positive or negative. We will tell the public. And also there was a strategy that they wanted to draw our attention away from investigative journalism, so that we tell the public what is going on, so that we go into playing in the mud with them. But we knew that, so that's why we responded once and kept quiet and continued doing our work, and we continue to urge journalists to do their work. Let the government officials make noise out there. If the Kenyans elected them to make noise, we should allow them to make noise. Kenyans will see, but we are not going to engage in that public spat with them. Already
exchange.
Yes. Already we've stated our position that we are not going to cede even an inch, because there's nothing they can do. Like Wakil has rightly put it, if they want to do some of certain things, they'll have to change the constitution, because that is the only way they'll be able to do some of the things they want to do. But so long as the constitution, Article 34, is as intact as it is, there's nothing they can do. If they want, and I told them that if they want to do some of the things they're talking about, they'll start by amending the constitution.
Right.
Yes. And you know that Constitution, the Bill of Rights, is one of the heavily protected articles in the Constitution. So it is going not to be easy for the government to amend it. But if they want to implement some of the things they want to do so that they can weaken the media, let us start by amending the Constitution.
Right. And you know, with freedom then comes responsibility. In the run-up to last year's 2022 general elections, the media was accused of giving large coverage to the Azimio coalition as opposed to the Kenya Kwanza. So what do you make of this? There were reports that said Raila Odinga enjoyed, of course, airplay up to 61%, and then the now President William Ruto followed at about 38%.
I think number one is, I think that report we didn't agree with it. That was a half-baked report because we looked at the statistics, we looked at the methodology, it was not convincing in research. So it's not a report that can be quoted. However, I think when we are doing our work as journalists, we do not measure that today I'm going to give you 20% and I'm giving the other person 20%. Sometimes it's not possible, humanly possible, to make that kind of equilibrium whereby you're giving this person 20%, you're giving what about if that day you didn't have any function? Are we going to create stories for you? You know,
just to make
exactly. So that we can have that kind of we talk about equity, not equal.
Right.
So that if you don't have a function, or if you have 10 functions today, and me, I'm your competitor, I didn't have any. Of course, you'll have the advantage of having more media coverage than me, who did not have any function that day. Or if you had 10, but I have 3. And my function, the 3 functions that I had, I've got more content than what you had, because also we look at the content and the quality. For example, you do 2 rallies, and the rallies that we're doing, you're inciting people. Of course, we'll not give you airtime to incite people. But me, I have my 2 rallies. I'm very clear on how I want to articulate my issue. I want to articulate my agenda. I have my manifesto. Of course, my function will have content than yours, because we wouldn't just carry a story for the sake of it. Of course, you know, there is the values of stories that are attached to stories. So it is not possible to give politicians 50-50 airtime. It's not possible. Of course, there's a day one will have more airtime. There's a day the other one will not have any. So those are the dynamics within newsrooms as editors we know. However, we sometimes try as much as possible. And that is actually our responsibility, to make sure that we are accessible, to make sure that if you have a function and you want coverage, the media is available. And that's what actually we do in a newsroom. So if Kenya Kwanza had a rally and they have sent invite and told the journalists to go to cover them, there is no single day editors say that, no, today you're not going to cover Kenya Kwanza, you are going to cover the media. It doesn't happen. Exactly. So all functions, whenever they were conducted, journalists, of course, they covered them. Of course, it is also just a narrative that Kenya Kwanza was their election strategy was play victim. So they were also playing victim, that, you know, we are victim, even the media doesn't like us. But I know from where I'm sitting, from where I sit, there is no any single day we sat in decision making that today or tomorrow we will not cover Kenya Kwanza rallies. So it's just a narrative that Kenya Kwanza was using as a strategy to play victim. Yeah.
Okay, if you say so. So, Wakila, let me involve you in this. I am looking at the Article 34, which is freedom of the media. And of course, freedom of independence, electronic, print, and other types of media. But just the question really is when the state is not allowed to, you know, enforce violence, supposed to give, be fair, not control the media. And so when that happens, then what is the power of the media? How can the media counter that?
I think this is now a question when we come to the Constitution of Kenya. Although the people of Kenya are supreme, the reality is the person who assists us the most in enforcing our Constitution is the judiciary of Kenya. Right. So I think it is time that the judiciary really showed its teeth or its claws when it comes to such kind of questions, because more often than not, they will always come to our aid and to our protection. But again, I would look at it in this particular way. In the previous administration, there was a lot of negative and pejorative remarks made against the judiciary. They were being called wakora and all sorts of things. But when push came to shove, the people who saved us were the judiciary. They saved us from BBI. They saved us from violence, post-election violence, because they made a decision and everything was settled during the election. So when push comes to shove, it is the judiciary to hold our hands and to save us from certain situations. I think it is now time that also when it comes to this question of the press, the same way that the judiciary came to our aid on those particular questions, then we need our civil society organizations, we need our activists, we need our Media Council of Kenya and all other journalistic organizations like my colleagues, Kenya Union of Journalists. We need them to be at the forefront of filing, of getting maybe people to help them to draft petitions to file before the High Court of Kenya, the Constitutional Division, so that we can get substantive decisions on these particular questions, so that when a journalist is assaulted, let it not just be a question of a journalist being, not of a normal person being assaulted. Let it be looked at from the lens of Article 34. This was not just a kawaida person who was walking on the street who was assaulted by police. This was a person who was exercising Article 34, the freedom of the press, and he was assaulted because of it. There should be a higher sanction, there should be more sanctions, and as we have said, the reality is that we need our judiciary to continue to really rub politicians the wrong way. And I think in the same way that my colleague has said, protection, we do not protect people from good things. We don't need to protect the freedom of speech from something nice. We only protect the freedom of speech because we are saying things that are offensive. If I was only going to say nice things, then there's no need to protect me. So really, the Constitution itself envisions these moments. It envisions these moments of conflicts. It envisions this moment of people disagreeing. It is a matter of when you disagree,
right,
do not castigate the other person improperly. Do not incite people to violence. Do not incite people to sort of absconding them or causing any sort of harm to them. So it's a question of how do we react when someone says something you don't like. Yes.
Right. But now, given the history between the state and the media, there have been many remarks that have been made and no action has been taken. So we have a constitution. If it's not enforced, then
I think I would not like to. I would not want to go to the direction of saying nothing is happening. We would use the example of when RMS and other media stations were shut down because of the transmission from analog to digital. For a period of time,
right,
they were shut down. But eventually, the person who first came to their aid was the High Court when they forestalled those orders of the government to close those particular channels. So it is a growing. We are a democracy that is on less than about. We are about 55. We are a very young democracy, and every day we see landmark decisions from the judiciary that assist us to see that our democracy is growing. So, as I've said, the best way for us to get these solutions is not to sit back and wait. It is not to sit back and say, oh, we are waiting for Kia Mtata, oh, we are waiting for LSK. Let everybody who feels injured by any particular action be the first to run to the court and say that my rights are being violated.
Right. Please
come to my aid.
Okay, and of the many attacks that have been on journalists, especially on the protest, the Azimio protest, then the Media Council has been accused of being reactive as opposed to, preparing for such circumstances.
Yeah, you see, the person who, or the body that has got responsibility to protect journalists or any other Kenya, that's government.
Right.
Because the Media Council does not have its own police whom they will deploy to go and protect journalists when they're working out. It's the responsibility of police to ensure that journalists are given a safe passage whenever they have those protests, because that's how it happens. Even right now, if you go to Ukraine, where Russia and Ukraine forces are fighting, but there are safe corridors for journalists to do their work. So we expect that even here in Kenya, if we have protests, of course, they usually turn violent. And what is supposed to happen is that the security are supposed to provide safe corridors for journalists to work, because journalists are not there because they're protesters. They are there because they are working the same way the officers are there to maintain law and order, journalists are also in this protest as part of their work to inform the public, because you can imagine if we have protests and journalists stay away, obviously the things that will happen there, nobody will ever want to talk about it. So that is why it is important that journalists are allowed to work, and the person to protect them is police, because the police, they have got the power and the responsibility to protect citizens' life and property of Kenyans. So what means that whenever these things happen, there's supposed to be some, maybe what we can do on our side is that if we know, because of course we'll know that there's a protest tomorrow, so what we can do is to have a plan with the police on how they are going to create those safe corridors for journalists. So maybe we could have failed in that, but also there's room for learning, so that we ensure that maybe in future protests, first we negotiate with the police that there are safe corridors for journalists to operate. Journalists are properly kitted. You remember sometimes I see journalists going to protest where we have got stones flying left, right, and center. We have got bullets, but they do not have bulletproof. They don't have headgear, So those kind of the arrangements that we're supposed to do in advance. And of course, immediately we saw the seriousness of this matter. I remember we did convene a meeting of different stakeholders, and we are able to issue some guidelines on these rooms. But of course, since then, we've not had any protest. But if we were to have a protest in future, we'll see things differently. We'll see journalists going out there and working in a safe corridor, and also properly with proper headgear, and even those who can afford bulletproof, they should have.
They get that.
Exactly. So those are some of the things that we were able to do analysis based on what was happening before the protests were called off.
Right. Yeah. And what do you make of the phrase, no story is worth your life?
Of course, that's what I'll tell journalists, that we want you to stay the following day also to give us the story. So because if you die today, who will give us the story tomorrow? So that's why I say the story, no story is worth your life. That is why you are supposed to be given proper briefing, supposed to be trained, and also you are supposed to give us your consent for you to go and cover any story in a hostile environment like that. For example, if you want to go to Kibra and you know the environment is hostile, first of all, you must give us consent. If you've never been to Kibra, why would you go to Kibra the first time when the environment is hostile, where people are running left, right, and center, stones? You don't know where to run to when you're in danger. So those are some of the briefings that we give journalists and editors whenever they want to deploy journalists to go out there to cover an event in a hostile environment.
Right. Yeah. And let's briefly talk about media ownership. And of course, different media houses have been said to be aligned to certain politicians. So then their coverage could be biased, or then the agenda that they set has been influenced by, say, a politician, a business person. So do media houses then stand on their own without external influences?
Yes, we have editorial independence, and we have got a section called editorial department in a newsroom. And we sit down and make decisions on how stories are going to be treated and how coverage of events are going to be done. Of course, media owners, they have got also they are Kenyans, and they may decide to take positions. And the position that they take out there, which is their right, actually they do not necessarily reflect on the decisions that are made, editorial decisions that are made by editors. Journalists vote. So I voted.
Right.
So that means you also voted.
Yes.
Yeah. So this fallacy of people saying that, oh, you like this politician, therefore you're not supposed to be independent. No. When you are exercising your right as a Kenyan to vote, that is not supposed to interfere with your work as a professional journalist. Right. You are supposed to remain as professional as possible, so that your political inclination out there is not supposed to influence your work. You are supposed to be guided by editorial policy of that media house, and number two, a code of conduct for practice of journalism. Those are the two major documents that are supposed to guide you in a newsroom when you're making decisions, so that you are not influenced by your political position. So I said sometimes politicians, even if you look at the media ownership in this country, most media houses are owned by politicians.
Right.
Yes, but that has never stopped journalists from doing their work. So because we have got those clear lines and positions that are taken, that whatever a political leader who owns a media house does out there, that does not interfere with the editorial policies. And we come out to defend editors whenever, because of course people fear that the owner of the media will want to impose some things on the editors, but we usually resist.
Right.
That you do your politics out there, let that not interfere with the positions and decisions that are made in newsrooms. So it's just a fallacy.
Okay.
I'll put it that way.
And maybe as we wind up, I really want to mention the Pakistani journalist who was killed in the country with the GSU officers, and they said it was mistaken identity. So when a foreign journalist is killed on Kenyan land, how do we go about it?
I think, I remember it was called Ashraf.
Shad Sharif.
Yes.
Ashad Sharif, eh? Yes. So I think the lesson to be learned here is, I always try to make my arguments very Kenyan-centric. So the lesson to be learned in this particular situation was, we want to make sure that our political leadership in this country and our journalists in this country are safe enough to not have to fear assassinations elsewhere. For example, I remember there's this story about, there's a journalist from Citizen who had a story, and then now she's in the US. She's not really living the life she could be living if she was in Kenya. And I think it's a matter of ensuring that whenever we are talking about this sort of offenses, we look at them, we'll need to specify that this offense was not committed just as a normal case of, for example, murder. It should not be investigated as a normal murder. It should be investigated in the lens that it was also a violation of a human right, other than the right to life. And that would be the best way for people to start getting consequences, not only criminal sanctions, but also economic and financial sanctions in terms of compensation to be paid to the journalist's family or those sorts of people, to put them in a position where they are safe. And even if they are not necessarily safe, then there will be some remedies that they can enjoy if at all something was to happen to them. On the question that you've asked my co-panelist on fair coverage or balanced coverage, I would like to say that when we look at Article 34, I think it is Article 34, it could be sub-Article 3 or 4, it is specific. Only the state-governed broadcaster, which is KBC, has a specific provision in the Constitution that requires it to have fair and impartial coverage. There is no requirement for the other stations to have fair coverage.
Right.
Only the state broadcaster is required to have fair and impartial coverage, and if at all, for example, the question that the Honorable President was talking about 61% coverage to Azimio and only 39%, that applies specifically to the state broadcaster. Other commercial interests, it's like saying that a gospel channel that only airs gospel music is not giving you fair coverage. They don't air political stuff.
Right.
They only air gospel news. So don't worry about what they're airing. Worry about what KBC is airing. Is KBC using public resources to advance certain agendas? But commercial entities and private entities are allowed to act in whatever manner they want, except with limitation to what is in Article 33, sub-Article 2, with the requirements of what not to do when exercising your freedom of speech, and also sub-Article 3 on not to injure the reputation of other persons when you are exercising your freedom of speech. So I think that question is, while it is relevant in terms of just the moral landscape, judicially or legally, it is not anything that people should worry about.
Right.
Yes.
And as we close right here, Odwar, then what do you make of the future of journalism in the country? Of course, we've come a long way. There have been attacks here and there, and most recently. But now, what do you make of the way forward?
Yeah, the media is here to stay. Journalism is here to stay because we play a very important role in society. You can imagine a society without journalism, or without journalists, or without the media, then that society will be in trouble. And that is why, if you read UN Plan of Action on Safety of Journalists, UN General Assembly passed that for us to have peace and stability in the world, we must have free and independent media that is able to hold those in positions of privilege to account. So we will have this kind of fight between the government and the media, but I know that the media will triumph because We are here to stay. And like, if you remember what I wrote in one of in my press statement when Kuria attacked journalists, I said that we've written political obituaries of so many leaders, including his will write. So because the media is here to stay, the Kenya Kwanza has got 10 years. After 11th year, we'll write what they did. That's all. The media is here to stay. We'll have this fight between the media and the government, but the media will triumph. Yes.
Right. Very well put. Maybe your final remarks.
My final remarks are that the fourth estate is as much an arm of government as the legislature, the judiciary, or the executive.
Right.
The fourth estate plays a major role in checking and balancing not only the judiciary and the legislature and the executive. It plays a major role in being a foundational pillar of democracy. Without journalism and without freedom of reporting and without freedom of expression generally, then there is nothing. Because we can only be able to make decisions. For example, how will I vote if I don't know the policies of the person I'm voting for? If I don't know his, the skeleton in his closet? Right. How will I exercise my rights? If I don't know my rights, it is for the journalists, it is for the media itself to play a major role to give public explanations to this constitution, to give public explanation to what is it that our rights are. So there is no democracy and there is no country without journalism. And my final prayer is that let us all be very vigilant, not just activists, not just civil society organizations, not just journalists, not just lawyers. Let us all be vigilant, because it is this one media that will one day give a positive story about something about, let's say, the DCI in their report. They say something so false about you, but it is only this media that will come to your rescue.
Right. Very well put, and thank you, gentlemen, for being part of this conversation. Eric Odor, Secretary General, Kenya Union of Journalists, and Advocate Obunde Stephen. And of course, this is a never-ending conversation. Let's keep it going across all our social media platforms at Lookuptv on Twitter, Lookuptv on Facebook, and Lookuptv on our YouTube channel. We appreciate you for watching. This has been Legally Speaking right here on Look Up News. I'm Nancy Nelima, and our sign language interpreter for tonight has been Angel Lois. Thank you for watching. Have a pleasant evening. Good night.